I am Michelle Rosenberg. Rational discourse is a feat of engineering. Like a physical bridge, a logical argument relies on load-bearing structures. To remain upright, the premises of an argument must physically support the weight of its conclusion. Looking at this node graph, we can visualize a logical fallacy. It is a structural stress fracture. The connection between the premise and conclusion snaps. The argument maintains an outward illusion of logical coherence, but it has completely bypassed the evidence. We are going to diagnose 10 specific logical fallacies. For each one, we will identify its psychological hook, locate its exact structural flaw, and provide the specific procedural response required to dismantle it. Without an understanding of these failure points, arguments become vulnerable to external manipulation. Identifying these fractures is the required first step to preserving the utility of rational discourse. We begin with the red herring. This tactic introduces an emotionally engaging but entirely irrelevant topic into a discussion to divert attention away from the central issue. The mechanics of this fallacy exploit human attention. Our cognitive bandwidth is finite. By introducing a controversial distraction, the speaker exhausts that bandwidth, leaving the original claim unresolved and unchallenged. To counter this, acknowledge the new topic, but immediately ask the speaker to explain its direct relevance to the original premise. This forces the conversation back to its starting point. This scale visualizes the asymmetry of proof. Asserting a broad claim is effortless. Disproving it requires exponentially more evidence. Shifting the burden of proof weaponizes this. The flaw forces the skeptic to disprove an unfalsifiable claim, pointing to the absence of disproof as evidence. Correct makeshift involves re-establishing the baseline of logic. The burden of proof lies entirely with the person making the assertion. If the claim is extraordinary, the evidence provided must be equally rigorous. When misdirection and unproven claims are allowed to stand, problem-solving stalls. The discussion moves away from evidence-based inquiry and toward a state where misinformation becomes difficult to extract from the debate. The straw man fallacy occurs when a speaker exaggerates or oversimplifies an opponent's position. They construct a weak, easily attackable distortion and defeat that proxy instead of addressing the actual argument. The psychological hook relies on simplicity and emotional ridicule. A distorted argument is much easier to process and dismiss, which can override the audience's ability to rationally evaluate the nuances of the original position. The strategy to neutralize this is steel manning. Before you critique an opponent's position, restate their argument in the fairest, most neutral way possible. You must demonstrate an understanding of the strongest version of their claim before attempting to refute it. The tu quoque, or you too, fallacy attempts to discredit an argument by accusing the speaker of hypocrisy. The flaw here is confusing the personal conduct of the source with the factual validity of the claim. A mechanic's advice on engine maintenance remains technically accurate even if they fail to maintain their own vehicle. The response requires a clean separation. Acknowledge the behavioral inconsistency of the speaker, but keep the focus strictly on the objective evidence of the argument itself. Attacking distorted proxies and personal behavior prevents participants from ever testing the actual facts of an issue. This results in dialogue that prioritizes personal victory over the discovery of a resolution. The appeal to force, traditionally known as ad baculum, entirely replaces logical reasoning with physical threats, coercion, or implied negative consequences. Fear of consequences bypasses critical thinking. When faced with a threat to employment, status, or safety, individuals prioritize survival. This generates strategic compliance, which is distinct from rational agreement. To dismantle this, isolate the threat from the evidence.
Evaluate whether the claim holds up independently of the pressure being applied to accept it. Conversely, the appeal to authority, or ad verecundium, treats an expert's endorsement as definitive, unquestionable proof, rather than a complement to data. Evaluating an authority requires understanding domain relevance. A physicist possesses expertise in physics, but that knowledge does not automatically transfer to public policy or economics. When authority is applied outside its specific field, the logical link between expertise and truth breaks. Address this by checking domain relevance and asking for the specific data that supports the expert's claim. Verify if the endorsement aligns with the broader consensus of their peers. Replacing rational evaluation with raw power or perceived prestige short-circuits independent analysis. It favors the maintenance of social hierarchy over the interrogation of ideas. The non sequitur translates to, "it does not follow." This occurs when the conclusion lacks any logical connection to the premises provided. We often miss this disconnect because persuasive language and associative thinking mask the gap. Advertisements might associate a specific product with personal happiness. Our brains intuitively bridge that gap, even though no logical link was established. To expose a non sequitur, strip away all rhetorical flourish. Restate the argument in elementary terms. When the fluff is removed, the absence of a logical bridge becomes apparent. This illustrates polysemy, using words with multiple meanings. This is the equivocation fallacy. Shifting a definition mid-argument creates a false illusion of validity. Participants believe they agree on a premise, but are discussing entirely different concepts. To prevent this, force precise, static definitions at the outset of the discussion. Ensure those definitions remain consistent throughout the entire chain of reasoning. When definitions are fluid, the argument cannot produce a stable conclusion. It leaves the participants in a state where they are using the same words while no longer addressing the same concepts. This graphic demonstrates the fallacies of composition and division. We incorrectly assume properties transfer perfectly between individual parts and the whole system. For example, lightweight parts can still result in a heavy machine. This error ignores emergent properties. System interactions generate entirely new characteristics. To avoid this, evaluate whether a property is strictly additive, like weight, or if it is dependent on the complexity of the interactions within the whole system. Finally, the appeal to fear, or ad metum. This fallacy highlights exaggerated or speculative threats to force immediate action and bypass careful analysis. The psychological hook is biological. It shifts cognitive processing away from reasoning and towards survival instincts, discouraging the viewer from questioning the evidence. The corrective response is to demand proportional statistical data. Verify if the documented risk actually matches the emotional severity of the threat being presented. Decisions based on a misunderstanding of system scale or primal fear result in misaligned actions. A policy designed based on an individual part may fail to produce the desired effect when applied to the whole. Rationality is not a default human state. It requires constant active structural maintenance against these specific failure modes. To neutralize flawed reasoning, we can employ a structured framework for evaluation. This matrix categorizes the structural flaws we've analyzed. It lists the fallacy, the psychological hook it uses, its mechanical flaw, and the specific response needed to address it. Applying these specific constraints provides a checklist for evaluation. It moves the focus of the observer from the emotional resonance of a claim to its structural validity. Utilizing this framework protects your personal reasoning and provides a standard for evaluating the information you encounter every day. Thank you for watching.